Dan eloquently presented on the sacrament of marriage, and it's a perfect time to talk a little bit about theology of the body. And it's something that no one had heard of here before. And I just started to say that it is a body of teaching that John Paul II began his pontificate with, a series of 129 lectures over a period of 5 years. And he based it on a scripture, particularly the Gospels, the letters of St. Paul, and the book of Genesis. And there are a few main parts to his teaching. I mean, Chris brought the book in one day, I don't know if you remember it, but this thick and extremely dense and difficult. So it's very hard to talk about this subject in 5 to 10 minutes. But there are 3 main parts to the teaching. He looked at who man was in the beginning, who he is now after original sin, and who he will be in the world to come. And then he took his reflections and applied them to the vocations of marriage and celibacy and sexuality issues in general. And these lectures were later compiled and further expanded upon in other encyclicals and exhortations and talks and such. And like I said, they were also put into this enormous book. And since then, many other things have been written by others as this teaching continues to develop. It's a very significant body of teaching, which is why it's really important to know about it. One of the top Catholic writers today, George Weigel, who's also a papal biographer, has called Theology of the Body one of the boldest reconfigurations of Catholic theology in centuries. He not only thinks it's going to have dramatic consequences in the 3rd millennium of the Church, but it will compel a major development of thinking, and a lot of people agree with him. Why is this? It's because Theology of the Body gives us a new perspective on what it means to be male and female, made in God's image and likeness. And it gives us a new language to speak about human nature, our faith, and our purpose. So it gives us a new language, and it gives us a whole new perspective. So that always opens up new possibilities for things. So what is it exactly? What did John Paul II outline the theology of the body? We begin with Genesis. And Dan actually mentioned some of these scripture passages earlier. In Genesis, we learn that we're made in God's image and likeness. In the 2nd chapter of Genesis, we see God takes clay from the earth and he breathes life into it, and a human comes in, a human is born, body and soul. So Adam finds himself in this place, and Adam is lonely because he is not an angel and he is not a mere animal. He is both body and spirit. And so Eve is taken from his side, and when he sees her, he says, "This at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." And we see here that then male and female are made from the same nature. They have human nature together. And John Paul II says that with the creation of Eve, the possibility now exists for union and communion. Marriage, the possibility for marriage exists. He says that man becomes the image of God, not so much in his moment of solitude, but in his moment of communion with another. That is how we image God. And this is because, as we've heard lots of times, we're made in the image and likeness of God. And what is God? God is a Trinity. He is a communion of persons. God is a communion of faithful, self-giving love, perpetually. So if we mirror God, we are called to mirror this self-giving love, and we do this through our bodies, depending on our state in life. That's going to obviously look different if we're married, if we're single, if we're celibate, whatever our calling is. I think many of us treat our bodies as unimportant, as secondary, We don't like our bodies. They cause us a lot of pain and problems and difficulty. We see our bodies as a shell. We think that the soul is the true nature of a person, but actually this is not the case. We are soul and body. And even though these exact bodies they are corrupted and they will die, they will be resurrected. And we will be body and soul completely ourselves in the world to come. It is through these bodies on earth that we do God's will and that we live our purpose, which is ultimately to learn to love and be loved. So the central point here with theology of the body is that your body and what you do with it is meant to be a sign of who God is. And theology of the body, what it does is it teaches and develops the sacramentality of the body. So what does this mean I just want to end with what this means sort of for everyday life. 3 things. It means we need to take care of our bodies. We need to treat them well. We need to adorn them in a dignified way. And we need to treat the bodies of other people respectively. It means our bodies speak a language. We don't just speak with words. Our bodies must speak what is true. This is part of why the church teaches that sex belongs in marriage, because you lie with your body. When you give your body over without a total commitment of love, and the rest of you is not giving that total commitment, but your body is, you lie with your body. So it's part of that idea that the body speaks a language, and that language should always reflect the true relationship you have with the other person. It also means that we mirror God best when we're in communion with others. Marriage is one form of this. It's one form of union with a special purpose, but we are called to be in communion with our families, our friends, the people we serve, our brothers and sisters, in our churches and our communities. We're called to be in relationship with others and to give ourselves to them in various ways. And again, we do this through the actions we take and through our bodies. Some people have called theology of the body a new sexual revolution because it calls everyone to a new understanding of what it means to be male and female and what it means to reflect God's image. I want to say a word about where this also leaves the whole vocation of celibacy, and it actually really elevates it, because the sacrifice of the sexual union points us to the meaning and purpose of it all, which is ultimately our union with God, and that's what everything points to, and that's what our bodies and what we do with our bodies should always be pointing to. So that is a little nutshell of theology of the body. It's like I said, there's a lot to it, and I know a couple people who are experts in this topic, and they give big long seminars on it. I think you will hear more and more about it in the days to come, because it really does have a lot to say, a lot of really great perspectives and interesting things to say about all kinds of issues related to the body. Any questions or comments?
Well, just, and I don't know if you told me or if Reed or somebody mentioned it, but that that he talks a lot about taking us back to original holiness. There's so much focus on original sin, is that right? That there's a lot of talk about original holiness, what came before the sin. And I like that idea of thinking about that as the beginning rather than starting from original sin.
Yeah, when I talked about those parts to the teaching, yeah, he spends a lot of time on the original purpose, the original meaning, the original life of man and woman before corruption. That ultimately, how good everything is, how good the body is. There's, I think, a tendency to think the body's bad, and so much of it, and there's a lot of fear around it.
Original innocence.
Original innocence, yeah, that's the term he uses,
Yeah.
original innocence. Yeah, so there's a lot on that.
There are programs, DVDs, CDs, all that commentaries on it, and it really is immense amount of material. And Pope John Paul II's writings are stratospheric for us to understand, but it's really good to get a commentary or watch one of these DVDs or CDs. It's amazing stuff. I've only seen some of it. And
I think
it's amazing.
It's worth pointing out too is that Pope John Paul. I mean, most of us came to know him as a pope when he became pope, but before he came into that position, before he became the Archbishop of Krakow, he was a university professor, and he was a phenomenologist, and he was a world-class thinker, a world-class phenomenologist. So when he's into this kind of writing, most of us, are sunk right away. What is his point? Where is he going? But he was taking us to a whole new level. That's what George Michael, who was a contemporary theologian, was saying. This is going to take a while for us to appreciate how important it really is. It's significant. I was at one of those. I was a young priest at one of those Wednesday audiences where he was giving one of these lectures, and I was sitting there like, I don't get the translation of the translation, thinking, what? Where is this going? I was coming at it, and I didn't know. I was kind of like, you ever walk into a middle of a conversation, you don't know what they're talking about, but you'd like to find out. And that was my thing. I was like, walking into the middle of this, I really would like to find out where this is going, because I was overwhelmed.
Well, a friend of mine who talks about this says that, of course, there's philosophy behind all these theologies, and where you had Augustine, who used Plato, and Thomas used Aristotle, and Pope John Paul II was a philosopher who used the phenomenologist and the personalist. So he used a different philosophy,
really
which brings him to a different place and a whole different way of looking at things. So it's very relationship-based, a lot of this.
And it really brings the church up. So to
Yeah, and like Sarah said, it takes it. What it does is take it away from a negative place, I think, and it sees it in a very beautiful, the way things are meant to be, how they can be restored again, kind of perspective. So it's
What is a phenomenologist? First time I've ever heard that word.
It is a school of philosophy that is contemporary, but it's built on, as I was mentioning, Greek philosophy. There's the school of Plato, which is kind of like the school of the ideal. Plato sees that everything exists as the ideal, and everything else is kind of, all these ideals exist. Ideal love, ideal beauty, ideal truth. Everything that we can deal with is only a reflection of what is the ideal. It's unreachable, unattainable. And Aristotle's school, again, it was kind of a Greek school. Was a Greek school of philosophy that was based on, everything went back to the question of the unmoved mover, what we call today the Big Bang Theory. That it all goes back to God. But then we're stuck. How do we get to God? We only know about God by what our minds can fathom. Whereas as believers, we kind of believe that God reveals Himself to us. God reveals Himself to us in Word, in Scripture, in tradition, and in reality. Well, contemporary philosophy took those two schools and came up with what a lot of us call existentialism. Anything I can experience is real. If I can experience it, it is real and it exists, as long as it's something I can relate to. It's kind of based on kind of both the thought and the scientific, provable, logical, tastable. I can feel it, I can experience it. The phenomenology kind of said, well, there's something of truth in each one of these schools. But my experience brings something to it. So I'm not doing a good job with this, but my experience brings something to it. So I can learn something from Aristotle, I can learn something from Plato, I can learn something from Thomas.
The progression, as it were.
Right, in contemporary experience, and I'm always getting a moving and understanding, and science. It's a blending of it all, and that's why I get lost in the part. John Paul is an expert.